We'll be opening at St Michael's on Sunday the 7th of March. We've got a short delay because we're just making sure that we've got everything in place, which I know we have, but we're just double checking. We'll have the three services, 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and a slight change. Instead of 11 o'clock, that third service will be at 11:15. That will just give people time to clear out from the 10 o'clock. So that will be 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock and 11:15. Well, this Sunday is the first Sunday in Lent. During the early Christian church, people were usually baptized on Easter Sunday. The 40 days before baptism were set aside for instruction and were of course seen to mirror the time that Jesus spent in the wilderness after his baptism before beginning his ministry. In the desert, Jesus was tempted. I think that this was a time for him to look forward to what was to come and also to reflect on what was behind him as he moved forward into a new stage in his life on earth. The church later took up the idea of the 40 days leading up to Easter as a time of reflection, a time to think about what a person had done perhaps a little bit wrong, and to put things right in the new dawn of Easter Day. So the 40 days became known as Lent, an Old English word for spring, which we all know is a time of new life and of growth. I've always loved history. I find it fascinating to look back from where we've come, for it is the past that has formed the present and informs the future. As Churchill once said, a nation that has forgotten its past has no future. I think that this is why historical novels and dramas are so popular. 8 years ago, I became captivated by a television drama which has gone on to run into several series and Christmas Day one-off films. The drama that I'm talking about actually made me stop and take stock because it actually takes place within my lifetime. The programme is called The Midwife, and the series is based on the autobiography of a nurse named Jennifer Worth. The book and the first few series were set in the 1950s in which she worked, and which now seem as distant as the First World War is, and yet they're part of my life. So why am I using Jennifer Worth's story in a talk at the beginning of Lent? Well, it's because Call the Midwife became my Lent book 8 years ago, and I think I will reread it again this year. There are actually 4 books. That's the first one. And then there are 4 others. The last one being, Farewell to the East End. All 4 of them are absolutely brilliant. As I watched the last episode in the series all those years ago, Lent came into my mind. As I've said, Lent is a time of reflection. And whenever we take time to sit and think, we begin to recall all kinds of experiences and encounters. Some funny, some sad, some joyful, some poignant. And that was very much like each episode of Call the Midwife, as they were very much bittersweet, and all of them based on reality. Each episode mirrored life, and so in one programme you would laugh, and at the next minute you'd have a lump in your throat. But as the credits came up, I somehow felt better. Lent is like this, and so is life. It has its ups and it has its downs. But by the end of Lent, we reach Easter Sunday, and the weather will be better. The daffodils, or Lenten lilies as they're often called, will be in bloom, the birds will be making their nests, and we will all, I hope, be looking forward to those long, warm days of summer. Call the Midwife allows you to look back 60 years, and it makes you realise how important the past and the present are, what we've lost and what we've gained. The television series cannot actually portray the conditions in which people in the East End lived. However, the book can and does. And just like the television programme is filled with all the many different times, moments and experiences and emotions which make up our lives. It is a hard, uncompromising read. If you don't want to be shocked and at times made to feel really uncomfortable, then don't read it. But there is great joy in it as well. It is really interesting to contrast life in the 1950s with life today in 2021. In many ways so similar, in others so distant as to be quite unrecognisable. Daily life was, I think, much harder and harsher in many ways in the 50s. Women were yet to gain the freedom that would come in the 60s. Living conditions were much tougher. Cities had large slum areas, often left over from the bombings during the war, especially in places like Liverpool, Manchester, London, Bristol. Crime in these areas was a huge problem, and it's interesting to think about the differences in food and clothing, pastimes. Would I want to return to those times? No, I don't think I would, except for one thing. Perhaps to gain the 50s feeling of community and collective responsibility, which were a central part of everyday life, something which was taken for granted, was natural, and was completely and utterly commonplace. The 50s, 60s and 70s and maybe into the 80s were not quite about the consumerism that has governed the last few decades and the shift from a we to an I society, with all its consumerism, and which Rabbi Jonathan Sacks wrote about so brilliantly in his last book, Morality, published last year. Take what is good for me. My needs override the needs of everyone else. I'm all right, Jack. Consumerism is a broken promise, because what I desperately want today, by tomorrow is old hat. Consequently, I'm never truly satisfied. However, with a bit of luck, we may keep in the future the good things that we've seen during lockdown. The obvious example being the spirit of simple gentleness and goodness, exemplified by Captain Tom. Good can come out of this last year if we learn, remember, and take forward the good things that we have seen and heard into the future, not only here in our own town, but also nationally and internationally. So my Lent book is hard-hitting. It looks backward from where we have come, and it makes us think about our lives today. And like Lent, the book is about faith and the transformation that faith can bring about. Jennifer Worth was challenged and changed by her work as a nurse. When she began her work in the East End of London, in Poplar, she was not religious. However, in her final book, she writes these words: I am a Christian. With every breath of my body, every beat of my heart, I trust and love God. Christian teaching guides my thoughts and my life. And you know, when you read it and you read about her experiences, that she really, really means it.